I used to think there were no more firsts left in my life. At 52, I had settled into the rhythm of a marriage that was neither bad nor particularly fulfilling. Robert was kind, attentive in the way a husband becomes after decades of quiet coexistence. Dinner on the table, calendars synced, yearly vacations planned with mathematical precision. Our sex life had dwindled into polite gestures, sometimes more out of obligation than desire. We didn't fight. We just coexisted, like matched luggage in the attic, side by side, dusty but intact. It was the summer Robert suggested we spend 2 weeks at the lake house to reconnect. His word, not mine, that everything began to shift. He meant well, as he always did. A cabin upstate, just the two of us, some wine and the water, maybe a hike or two. I pretended to be excited. What neither of us expected was that my stepbrother, Daniel, would be there. I hadn't seen Daniel in over 20 years. Technically, we were siblings by marriage. His mother married my father when I was 19 and he was 20. Our parents were married for 8 years before they quietly divorced. No drama, no scandal, just the fading of affection. Afterward, Daniel and I lost touch. We had been friendly during our time as step-siblings, but we were both busy with college, early careers, relationships. We drifted apart. He arrived on the second day, his unexpected presence explained in a voicemail from my father. Daniel's going through a rough patch, needed a place to clear his head. I told him to go up to the lake house. Thought you'd already gone back to the city. So there we were, three of us in one house built for quiet. I'll never forget the way I first saw him again, standing barefoot on the dock in the early morning mist, sipping coffee, a book under his arm. The way his shoulders looked broader, his hair silvering at the temples. A salt and pepper beard covered the strong jaw I remembered. He had that relaxed, worn-in look some men get after 50, the kind that doesn't apologize for age, but wears it like a favorite leather jacket. I stopped in my tracks. "Anna," he said when he saw me, smiling like we'd only been apart for a few weeks, not decades. "Daniel."
God.
You look exactly the same," he said, stepping in for a hug. He was lying, but sweetly. I had aged. I wasn't trying to fight it with Botox or dieting anymore. But the way he looked at me, his arms around my back, lingered in a way that lit something dormant in me. We decided to make it work for the weekend until someone could figure out new plans. But Robert, ever polite, insisted Daniel stay. "More the merrier," he said. That first night, we sat on the deck drinking wine. Robert went to bed early, always the morning jogger. Daniel and I stayed out late, the lake a mirror in the moonlight. He told me about his divorce, 2 years past. A cold, clinical split after 25 years. No children. He'd sold his business, and with no wife, no routine, and too much time, he felt untethered. "You ever feel like you're sleepwalking through your life?" he asked. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The next day it rained and we stayed inside. The three of us played board games, like some strange family unit from another lifetime. But when Robert went upstairs to make calls for work, Daniel and I settled onto the old couch in the den, a blanket between us. He remembered everything. The way I took my coffee. The books I loved in college. He made fun of how I used to hum while brushing my teeth. And then there were the small touches, his hand brushing my knee when he laughed, the way his eyes lingered on my face a second too long. It felt like we were circling something unspoken, something we hadn't dared touch back then. The storm passed, and the heat returned. One afternoon, Robert left to visit an old friend a few towns over, promising to be back the next morning. Daniel and I were alone. I wore a simple linen dress, barefoot on the wood floors, a glass of white wine in hand. He was reading by the window when I walked in, but his eyes didn't go back to the page. "You look incredible," he said quietly. I felt my stomach flutter. It had been years since a man looked at me like that. My husband hadn't said anything about my appearance in months. "You're just saying that." I laughed, turning away, but I felt his eyes following me.
No.
"I'm not." There was a silence then.
Thick.
Charged. I turned back to face him. "I used to think about kissing you," he said, just above a whisper. The words hit me like a soft blow. Not shocking, but seismic. I couldn't breathe. We were kids. I managed, but even I didn't believe the protest in my voice. I wasn't, he said, rising slowly, stepping closer. I was 20. I knew exactly what I was thinking. We stood there, inches apart, the hum of the fan the only sound in the room. He reached up and brushed a lock of hair from my face, the back of his fingers trailing my cheek. I leaned into his touch before I could stop myself. I never forgot the way you laughed, he said. Or how you looked at me when you thought no one else was watching. I let out a breath. My heart was racing, my skin alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. I'm married, I whispered. I know. We stood frozen for a moment, a thousand thoughts between us. I should have walked away. I should have told him to stop. But I didn't. Instead, I closed the distance and kissed him. It was soft at first, tentative, a question. Then it deepened, his hand sliding to the small of my back, pulling me against him. My body responded without hesitation, mouth opening, breath hitching, fingers tangled in his shirt. The years fell away. I felt young, desired, dangerous. He lifted me effortlessly, carrying me to the guest room, our mouths never parting. Clothes peeled away, hands rediscovering skin, curves, heat. He worshipped every inch of me, as if he were memorizing a language he'd once known by heart. I won't lie. I moaned. I trembled. I let go in a way I hadn't in decades. He made me feel like I was still a woman, not just a wife, not just a mother, but a living, breathing, sensual woman. Afterward, we lay tangled in the sheets, listening to the cicadas outside. I don't know what this is, I whispered. Neither do I, he said, tracing lazy circles on my hip. But I don't want it to end. And I didn't either. But it would get more complicated. I knew that. I wasn't naive. This wasn't some harmless summer flirtation. I had a husband upstairs, a marriage, a life. But something had been reawakened. I couldn't unfeel it. I stared at the ceiling, his breath warm against my neck. The storm wasn't over. It had just begun. The next morning, the guilt didn't come. I lay beside him in the pale light of dawn, listening to the bird song through the open window, the sheets still warm from our bodies. My mind knew I should feel ashamed, racked with regret, angry at myself for betraying Robert. But instead, all I felt was peace. Not euphoric, not giddy, just a quiet, humming satisfaction. A stillness I hadn't known in years. Daniel stirred beside me, his hand grazing my thigh as he turned. I thought you might be gone, he murmured, his voice thick with sleep. I almost was, I whispered, but I didn't want to move. He pulled me closer, his breath warm against my shoulder. For a long time, we didn't speak. There was nothing to say yet. We were still suspended in that fragile space before reality fully returned. But it did. Around 9 a.m., Robert's car pulled into the driveway. I was in the kitchen, hair damp from the shower, pretending to read a magazine I couldn't focus on. Daniel was upstairs, the guest room door shut. Morning, Robert said, coming in with a box of fresh croissants. He kissed my cheek, and I flinched just slightly, but enough that I noticed it. Sleep okay? He asked, taking a seat across from me.
Fine.
Quiet. He didn't notice anything. He poured coffee, talked about his visit with an old college friend, how much the guy had aged. I smiled when appropriate, nodded, even laughed once. But I felt like I was wearing a mask 2 sizes too small, tight, itchy, barely holding together. Daniel came down a few minutes later. His face was unreadable. Not guilty, not smug, just present, as if nothing had happened. And we pretended. That entire day was an exercise in pretending. 3 adults in a cabin, sipping iced tea and talking about old memories, weather, politics. I watched Daniel from across the room, wondering how I hadn't seen it before. That desire, that hunger, that quiet electricity he seemed to carry just beneath the surface. That night, in bed beside Robert, I turned my back to him and stared at the ceiling. He placed a hand on my hip, tentative, affectionate. You okay?
Yeah.
Just tired. He kissed the back of my shoulder and settled in. And I lay there, my eyes wide, feeling Daniel's hands in memory, his mouth, the way he had made me feel like I still had power, still had choices. The next day, I told Robert the first wanted to take a walk alone. Instead, I went to the boathouse. Daniel was already there. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. He kissed me before I could say a word, and I melted into him like we were made of the same breath. It wasn't just lust, it was connection, rebellion, maybe even love, though I wasn't ready to call it that. We made love again on the old wooden bench, the sound of the lake slapping against the dock like a metronome. It was different this time, slower, deeper. I cried afterward, not from regret, but from the overwhelming sense that I was alive again, that something inside me had cracked open. I don't want this to be a secret, Daniel said softly, brushing my hair back. I don't want to sneak around like this. And what, Daniel? Blow up my life. Maybe it needs to be blown up. But I wasn't ready. We left the boathouse separately, timed 5 minutes apart like guilty teenagers. I washed my face before returning to the cabin, practiced my smile in the reflection of the window. Robert was chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up at me, unknowing, trusting. Want to make the salad? Sure, I said, tying my hair back. The days that followed were a blur of small deceptions. Moments stolen in the woods, whispered conversations behind closed doors, the brush of fingers under the table. Each encounter with Daniel was electric, like our bodies were magnets, drawn together by something inevitable. But in between the rush, the cracks were forming. I started seeing Robert not just as my husband, but as a man I was betraying. Not coldly, not maliciously, but undeniably. One night, Daniel and I sat on the back porch after Robert had gone to bed. The stars above us were brilliant, unfiltered by city light. We didn't touch, didn't kiss. Just sat close enough for our knees to brush. Do you remember the night our parents got married? He asked. Of course. You wore that ridiculous teal tie. And you wore a yellow dress that made your eyes look like sunflowers. I laughed. You noticed? I noticed everything. We were silent again. I think I fell for you that night, he said finally. And I've spent 20 years pretending it didn't matter. My breath caught. Daniel, I'm not trying to pressure you. If this ends here, if you choose to go back and pretend none of this happened, I'll understand. But I can't pretend anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to Robert's even breathing beside me, wondering how I got here. I wasn't the kind of woman who cheated. I wasn't reckless or selfish. I was a mother, a wife. I'd spent years putting everyone else first. But something in me had been starving. Not just for sex, for intimacy, for passion, for the feeling of being seen. With Daniel, I felt seen. That weekend, we all packed up and drove home. Robert chatted during the ride. Daniel drove behind us. At a gas station, I stepped out to stretch, and Daniel brushed past me. Come by my apartment, he said, so low only I could hear. Tuesday, 10 a.m. I didn't answer, just nodded. I spent Monday in a haze. Every decision I'd ever made, marrying Robert, staying home with the kids, returning to work part-time, giving up painting, accepting boredom, looped through my mind like an old film reel. Tuesday morning, I dressed carefully. Jeans. A pale blue blouse. Not too much makeup. Not like a woman going to see her lover. I told Robert the first was going to a gallery exhibit. I drove to Daniel's apartment. He opened the door like he'd been waiting his whole life. We didn't talk. Not at first. We undressed each other slowly, reverently, as if stripping off decades. We made love in the sunlight. No shadows, no lies. Afterward, we lay together in silence. And then I cried again. Tell me what you want, he whispered, brushing a tear from my cheek. I don't know, I said. But I don't want to lose this. You. He nodded. Then don't. But how could I not? That night, Robert made dinner, pasta, his signature garlic bread, a glass of Merlot. I've missed you lately, he said softly. I looked at him, really looked. His hands, strong and careful. His lined face. The man I'd built a life with. And I felt something new. Guilt. For the first time, real guilt. because I realized I still loved him,
Just not the way I used to.
and not the way I was beginning to love someone else. There is a peculiar kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being split in two, living one life with your hands, another in your heart. That fall, I perfected the art of compartmentalization. Mornings with Robert, afternoons with Daniel, evenings with my own thoughts, often drowned in wine and the low hum of the dishwasher. I never imagined myself as a woman with a secret. And yet, every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I slipped quietly into Daniel's apartment like I was stepping through a crack in the universe, out of the familiar, the domestic, and into something raw, electric, alive. We didn't always have sex. Sometimes we just lay together, limbs entangled, talking about nothing and everything. He told me about his youth, things he never shared when we were siblings, how he'd secretly hated business school, how he'd once dreamed of becoming a writer. I told him about the painting I used to do before the kids, before the PDA meetings and grocery lists and carpool schedules swallowed my days whole. You should start again, he said once, tracing my collarbone with his finger. Paint something messy. Let it be terrible. Just don't stop.
So I did.
I bought a small set of oils and a blank canvas and started painting in the garage where no one went. I didn't tell Robert. It felt too close to telling him everything. Daniel made me feel like I had secrets worth keeping. But secrets have weight. And the more you carry them, the more they warp the shape of your life. Robert noticed, eventually. Not the affair, not yet, but the shift. I'd become different. Lighter, maybe. Or distracted. He started asking questions. You've been quiet lately. I'm just tired. You're always going out in the mornings now. Galleries again? Yeah, I said. They calm me. In some twisted way. It was true. I think part of me hoped he'd push. Catch me. Force the truth out, so I wouldn't have to choose. But Robert, ever the gentleman, respected my space. He trusted me. And that trust, that maddening, undented faith in me, became unbearable. The sex with Robert improved. Not in frequency, but in intensity. It was like I was trying to convince myself there was still a spark. I'd initiate, something I hadn't done in years. He responded, grateful but confused. I'd watch his face as he touched me, and all I could think was, he has no idea. I was loving another man, thinking of another man.
And he didn't see it.
Or maybe he did, and just couldn't bear to face it. One night, after we made love, he held me tighter than usual and said, "You feel far away lately, even when you're here." And I didn't know what to say, because he was right. Daniel and I began to travel. Little day trips, upstate, the shore, a secluded Airbnb once where I let myself cry against his chest, not knowing if it was joy or grief I was feeling. I want more than Tuesdays, he said once, brushing my hair back as we lay in a bed that wasn't mine or his. I want mornings, evenings, holidays.
You.
But how could I dismantle an entire life? My children were grown, yes, but they still came home for holidays. My daughter was pregnant. My son had just gotten engaged. Robert was planning to retire early. We had plans, dinners with neighbors, trips to France. The kind of quiet, predictable life we'd built brick by brick. To throw it away? For what? For passion? For love? For freedom? Some nights I couldn't sleep. I'd sit in the living room long after Robert went to bed, staring out the window, listening to the silence of the house. This house that had known every version of me. Wife, mother, hostess, caretaker. But never lover. Not like this. I started journaling again. At first it was just scribbles, raw emotions. But eventually full entries. Letters I'd never sent. Confessions I couldn't say aloud. I kept the journal in my art box, hidden beneath tubes of paint and a stained rag. One entry read, "I don't know if I'm falling in love or just remembering what it felt like. Maybe Daniel isn't my future. Maybe he's just proof I'm not dead yet." The question haunted me. Was I running toward Daniel or away from my own emptiness? Thanksgiving arrived, and with it, my daughter Emily and her husband, and my son Mark with his fiancée. The house was full, noisy, warm with laughter and the smell of sage and roasted garlic. Daniel was a ghost in my mind, hovering just beneath the surface, like a song I couldn't turn off. I smiled. I hosted. I carved the turkey and kissed Robert's cheek when he poured the wine. I played the role, but I felt like I was watching myself from across the room. After dinner, Emily asked if we could talk. She sat with me on the porch, the air sharp and sweet with fallen leaves. "You seem different," she said.
How?
"I don't know. Lighter."
Sadder.
"Both." I swallowed hard. My daughter had always seen through me. "I've just been thinking a lot.
About life.
About who I am now that you're all grown." Emily took my hand. "You're allowed to want things, Mom. Even now." She had no idea what her words did to me. Or maybe she did. The following week, Daniel and I went away for 2 nights. A cabin in the woods, no cell service, just us and a roaring fire. We made love every way two people could, with laughter, with tears, with desperation. At one point, we sat on the floor wrapped in a blanket, eating soup from the pot, and I looked at him and said, "If I walked away from it all, would you catch me?"
He didn't hesitate.
Yes. That was the moment something broke open in me, because I believed him, and I wanted him to be right. But still, I went home, back to Robert, who met me at the door with his usual warmth. "Did you have a good trip?" "It was peaceful." I lied. And I hated myself for lying so easily. December came, and the weight of the holidays descended. Lights, pine-scented candles, obligations. Robert wanted to host the Christmas party. I smiled and said yes, even as my stomach turned. One evening, I walked into the garage and stared at my painting. It was a chaotic swirl of color, raw and unfinished. I stood there for a long time, brush in hand, until I finally let go and painted without thought, just movement and instinct. It was the first honest thing I'd done in weeks. I cried afterward, because it felt like truth. Because I knew I couldn't live like this much longer. Because one of these lives, one of these loves was going to have to end. And I didn't yet know which. Winter arrived like a whisper. No dramatic snowstorms, no howling wind, just a slow, cold settling. The kind that makes you pull your sleeves lower, even indoors. December stretched on, heavy with the rituals of the season. Wrapping paper, polite invitations, candles placed carefully on window ledges. But inside me, everything was unraveling. My affair with Daniel had become a second life I couldn't control anymore. It had grown teeth. It followed me home in the scent of his cologne on my scarf, in the marks he left on my thighs that I covered with tights. It filled my thoughts when Robert touched me, soft, affectionate touches that made me want to cry, not from guilt, but from the chasm between us I could no longer ignore. Daniel wanted an answer. "What are we doing, Anna?" he asked one morning as I buttoned my blouse. "How long are we going to pretend this can stay hidden?" "I don't know," I whispered. I need time." "I've given you time," he said, his voice tight with pain. "But I'm not going to be your secret forever. I never asked you to be. You didn't have to. You just keep showing up, loving me in pieces." He turned away. I sat on the edge of the bed, the winter sun slicing across the floor. I wanted to say something. "I love you. I'm scared. I'm trying." But I said nothing, because there was no neat answer, no brave speech that could make the next step any easier. That afternoon, I went home and started cooking. Something elaborate. Osso buco, roasted carrots, risotto. Robert came home to the smell and wrapped his arms around me like we were 25 again. "Something special?"
No, elite.
I just missed making something that takes time. We opened a bottle of wine, ate slowly, talked about the kids. And then, somewhere between the second glass and clearing the plates, Robert looked at me and said it. "Are you in love with someone else?" I froze. Time stopped. The words echoed like church bells in an empty town. He said it calmly.
No anger. No accusation.
"Just a question." And for the first time in months, I told the truth. "Yes." He sat back, closed his eyes, nodded once, as if he'd been waiting for the words, as if hearing them was better than imagining worse. Is it serious? I swallowed. It wasn't supposed to be, but it is. He stood and walked to the window, stared out at the bare trees. I knew something was different. I just didn't want to know how different. I never stopped loving you, I said. I believe you, he replied. But that doesn't fix this, does it?
No.
He was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, how long? Since the cabin. He gave a small, almost broken laugh.
Jesus.
I'm sorry. I know.
We didn't talk more that night.
He slept in the guest room. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest hollow. Not relieved. Not free. Just exposed. In the morning, Robert made coffee, like usual. Poured me a cup. We didn't say much. Just existed beside each other, like old furniture in a quiet room. Days passed. He didn't ask me to leave. Didn't rage. Didn't cry. Instead, he asked to talk. I think we should separate, he said one evening. Not forever. Not yet. But we need space. I nodded. Do the kids know? Not yet. We'll tell them together. So we did. And it was awful. Emily cried. Mark was stunned. They asked questions we didn't know how to answer. We gave them the soft version. We grew apart. We need time. It's not your fault. We didn't mention Daniel. That was my weight to carry. Robert moved into a furnished rental across town. Quiet.
Clean.
His shirts still hung in our closet for weeks before I could bring myself to fold them into a box. Daniel didn't say, I told you so. When I told him what had happened, he just held me. Quietly.
Gently.
We didn't make love that night. We just lay in his bed, fully clothed, hands intertwined, both of us afraid to breathe too loudly. But things changed. Now we could go out, have lunch in public, go for walks, buy wine together. We weren't hiding anymore. And yet, something was missing. Not in Daniel. In me. I'd thought that leaving Robert would feel like freedom. But instead, it felt like vertigo. The loss of something so familiar, so foundational, made every day feel slightly off balance. Daniel was everything he'd promised to be. Patient, warm, attentive. He made me laugh. He made me feel like a woman, not a role. But I was grieving, and grief doesn't follow romance's timeline. One morning, as we sat on his balcony drinking coffee, he said, Do you regret it? I looked at him.
No.
But I'm scared. Of what? That I don't know who I am anymore. He nodded slowly. I think this is who you are, he said. Someone brave enough to want more. I wanted to believe him. So, I tried. I painted more. Started selling a few pieces through a small gallery. Reconnected with old friends I'd let drift away. I got a part-time job at a local art center, teaching beginners. Daniel came to my first open studio night. He stood in front of a piece I'd titled Disobedience, a canvas of wild brushstrokes in reds and blacks and ash white, and said, This is you. But Robert was still in my life. We talked. Not often, but enough. Birthdays, holidays, check-ins. We were still family, still tethered by history and habit and love that didn't fit anymore but hadn't entirely died. Then one afternoon he called and asked to meet. We sat in a cafe, the kind we used to go to after church. He looked older, tired, but composed. I wanted to tell you something, he said. I've met someone. I blinked. I wasn't looking, he added quickly. It just happened. I smiled, unsure what emotion was supposed to come.
Good, I said. I'm glad.
He nodded, then leaned in almost conspiratorially. Her name is Linda.
She's not you.
But she's kind, and she makes me feel calm.
Calm is good, I said.
He touched my hand once, softly. I'll always love you, Anna. But I understand now. You needed more. I just wish you could have told me before it got so broken. I didn't answer. Because he was right. And also because nothing is ever that simple. I left the cafe with tears in my eyes and called Daniel on the way home.
He's moved on, I said.
Are you okay? I think so. But I wasn't sure. Daniel and I began planning a trip. 2 weeks in Portugal, a place I'd always wanted to see. We booked flights, rented a flat, bought guidebooks. And yet, as the departure date approached, I felt something closing in around me. I sat on my porch one night alone, drinking wine, staring at the dusk. And I asked myself, not for the first time, did I leave for him? Or for me? Is Daniel my future? Or just my escape? And if I love them both in different ways, what did that say about love?